What's that? Who there? Whoa.
I want to shift to, and I think this is right on thread, to tactical pieces about the podcast. And I think the reason I want to push on this, both because you have one and I have one as well, but I think there's a lot of people out there that these lessons can be applicable for with creating anything, right? Getting started and building it. So the first piece I wanted to touch on was getting guests. You've had amazing guests from the beginning. And I think my approach was always, okay, do whatever I can to get a couple of key big name guests and then use them to credentialize yourself when you go to other guests. And that seemed to have worked well. But getting those big guests at the beginning when you have no credibility is brutal. It's tough to do. And
it's tough.
Yeah, I'd love for you to talk through, what were some of the different approaches that you used that worked? And let's get really tactical for people and try to give them some tips.
Yeah, I'll try to share as many examples as I can. And I'll preface this by saying, this was in 2015, 2016 when I first did it. So obviously by 2021, a lot of these people are getting hit up with lots of requests. So it might be a different approach if you're starting from scratch today. But I'd say I'd bucket them into a couple main categories. One is cold outreach. The second is warm outreach, which is much better if you can get to that stage. And then the third one, I'd say I'd group that into a one-to-many approach. So I'll go for each one. I'll quickly, let's say cold first, right? Cold is when you're first starting out, you have no network, you're just starting from scratch. That is, and I hate to use this phrase because people take it out of context, but that's just straight hustle, right? You're DMing people, you're cold emailing, you're getting rejected 97% of the time, or whatever the number is. You're basically falling on your face, and it hurts your ego, and it's tough. So that's where everyone has to kind of start. So I'll give a couple of examples in a second, but just to summarize, the second one is warm, which is going through your current network, or once you get guests, you can ask them for intros. That's obviously a much better approach if you can get to that stage. And then the third one is, one to many. So this means creating relationships with people who have access to multiple potential guests for you. So that could be investors, it could be publishers for a book, other podcasters, PR is another one, exactly. And so I think that one's kind of self-explanatory, but the cold one, I'll go into a couple of examples. So the first guest I ever got was a guy called Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. So he's a huge guest. That was a really big one to get. I didn't own a microphone. I didn't have a podcast. I just about had a name, I think. I think I had registered a domain name, and I'd been procrastinating because, you've got your job, life takes over, and you're like, oh, one day I'm going to do this thing. So I met this guy at an event, and at this moment I thought, oh, I've actually been following his stuff for some time. And for context, he's got one of the biggest YouTube channels. It's 10 billion views, the biggest news channel on the internet. They're a left-leaning kind of news channel. So I'd seen his stuff for ages, and working at Google and YouTube, they always use them as an example. So I saw him at this event, had a conversation, and that was one of the first times I actually just cold pitched and asked straight up. And I said, but I didn't have anything to pitch. So what did I do? I created some rapport, but then I basically tried to hone into a seed of an idea that I'd planted earlier, which was you or me once upon a time. And I was saying to him I've got this idea. I'm trying to interview people, share their story, X, Y, Z. And he thought about it, and he was like, okay, email me next week. And he whipped out a bunch of cards, and they were all other people's cards, and he just had one of his own left, and he gave it to me. And that was him being nice, right? And now I know in hindsight. And I don't want to bore you with the full story, but I think it's quite important to share some of the details. The next week, to go more tactical, I send an email, like he said. He adds in his chief of staff and says, okay, we'll see if we can make it happen. She says, sorry, he doesn't have any time at the moment, which is fair enough. So at that moment, I said, okay, cool. I appreciate you getting back. Would love to stay in touch. Maybe in a few months, we can touch base again. How's your summer going? And that was just me being kind of nice or something along those lines. And she replied and said, thanks for asking. I'm actually getting married in a few months. And we had these emails back and forth. And I checked the other day, I had 43 emails with this chief of staff. And by the end, she sent me her wedding photos. And the reason I shared that anecdote is, one, because it's kind of funny, but also because that's kind of what it took. Like, she did me a huge favor eventually by getting me in his calendar. And that was because I was genuinely nice. I gave someone who often gets ignored all the time, like the time of day. And I basically asked something. And that is often what it takes early on. You need a bit of a break. And, so that was one example. And I'll pause there because I don't want to keep going unless you want me to give other examples.
No, those are great. Yeah, I'm open to more examples as well. I was going to layer on, so like what I did for this show, because I started right at the beginning of COVID. So I had no in-person potential interaction at all. So it was all remote. And so I made a list of 50 companies and founders that I liked. And I tried to prioritize them, like, okay, out of 10, how hard would it be to get these, just based on like how high profile I felt like they were. And then I said, okay, I think I made a list of 100, and I said 4 days in a row, I'm going to send 25 emails each day.
Oh, wow.
But for every single email, I tried to customize the top and say, like, something I really liked about them, something I really liked about their business. I think I sent the first 25, and I only got 2 responses, but I landed those 2. And then since then, every single guest, like a tradition on the show, is that they kind of refer. And it's a warm intro trick, but they refer one of someone that's in their network, and that's how I've been going. And
amazing.
You have to send those cold emails a lot, but that's, you have to customize them and really like give them the due time that they deserve.
Completely, man. Yeah, no, I love to hear that story, man, because that's kind of what it takes. And a lot of people, like, there's even examples where I'll give one more recent one, Sean Puri from Twitch, who has got another podcast, My First Million. He hosts with Sam Parr from The Hustle. And this guy, I'd spoken to him on the phone basically before he had a podcast. And I was like trying to help him out with one thing, and he was helping me out with something. So I even had his phone number, and he said yes over DM to like, yeah, I'll do the show with you. And then he just went like quiet, right?
Yeah,
it went cold, and it's because he's getting 1,000 DMs. So like so I didn't take it personally, but there's also an art to follow up, right? And one of the things I did was I didn't let it hit my ego. I just said, okay, cool, he's busy, so am I, but I'm gonna reach back out. And each time I reached back out, I think it took like 3 or 4 times, I said, hey man, I hope everything's well. In fact, maybe I even skipped that by the end because I was trying to keep it short and sweet. I would give an update. I'd say, since we last spoke, I booked Tim Urban. He's got #1 TED Talk in the world. Your co-host, Sam Parr, we recorded last week. And I would give him enough kind of tailored messaging to say, I'm still moving forward. I'd love to have you join this rocket ship. Come aboard, and eventually it works. And we had a great conversation. But I think a lot of people don't realize how much of that it takes to just keep going back and forth with people, and not to be annoying, and actually add value in that interaction, and to say, like, here's an update. I think that's a key thing as well.
Yeah, most people, and to put a pin in it, most people aren't willing to put in the work to, all right, do all those outreaches cold, track them all, follow up in a consistent cadence, be willing to say no, like get the no's. It's tough. It's a lot of work.
Can I ask a question, actually? What's your main day job then? Are you in sales by any chance?
No, so I kind of actually, I work in consulting, but I run kind of a small startup group within Deloitte Consulting.
Oh, cool.
So I'm selling a lot during the day, but yeah, it's a huge, suck on my time. And so it's really tough to, because the other thing is when you send these, and I know we're getting really tactical, but when you send these cold emails, you kind of have to send them during the workday for these people to respond, because a lot of founders have really regimented schedules and they get offline at 5, 6, 7 p.m. So if you waited until the end of your workday, they're going to miss it. It's going to get buried in their inbox. So you kind of have to find a way to kind of either pre-program them or something like that to get them through the day.
Schedule it out or whatever. Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah. And I feel like we could jam on this forever on the podcast logistics.
Whatever you want to chat about, man. It's all good.
Yeah. So one question just in your reflection. So I know since you started going consistent, I know your show has grown consistently big time over the last, few months. Yeah. I wonder, what do you think are the biggest reasons for why it's, what's moved the needle for the growth other than just the consistent cadence?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple things. One, I think the consistent cadence is a really big part of it, which is an obvious answer, but it's not just like doing it consistently, like keep churning out stuff. It's doing it at a certain level that people can expect to know, every time they come and listen to Creator Lab, there's going to be a top guest I've already done the filtering process for you that you know that is someone worthwhile listening to. And like this, and I've combed through the conversation enough that the quality is very high. The signal or whatever you want to call it is pretty high. And then the other big thing is I started posting elsewhere and leveraging other channels like Twitter, for example. So I always had Twitter, but I would just use it as a channel to like post the episode with like no followers, right? So I had to really commit on one channel. That's something I learned from Pump. Anthony Pompliano, I had him on the show and we talked about building an audience first empire. He's got to like 500,000 plus followers now. And what a lot of people see is the end result with him, right? They see, oh, he's got 500,000 followers and a big podcast and a YouTube show and 100,000 plus email subscribers. What they don't realize a lot of the time is he did one channel at a time. And especially in early stages, you really need to concentrate your efforts, I think, in one or two channels. So maybe it's one primary channel where you record. So for us, it's a podcast long form, and then another primary channel where people that we're trying to attract hang out. So, for me, that's Twitter. I think it's probably the same for you. For other people, that might be LinkedIn. For someone else, it might be Instagram or YouTube. And so I do put stuff on YouTube, but I haven't like perfected that by any means. I haven't really optimized enough for it. So my big channel has been leveraging guests, audiences on Twitter, also posting consistently myself, not just about the podcast, but in general, ideas, business stuff I'm interested in, and building up a tiny following. I've got like 5,000 followers or something. So for me, that helps in the long run, because instead of me like skimming myself everywhere and posting on Instagram, I haven't even posted on Instagram for ages now, though like I do want to get to that eventually. So I'd say, yes, posting consistently, then using something like Twitter to get in front of more people in the discovery side. And key to that is not just the promotion part, is what am I promoting? You follow my stuff, right? There's these clips, and it's giving people an appetizer before the main course. So I'm saying to them, all right, this person you're following, Polina, Pomp, Jack Butcher, whoever, you're already following them. Now they're sharing a clip, 1 or 2 minutes worth, and they don't know me. They don't like care about who I am. So I need to give them something snackable that is entertaining enough or useful that piques their interest. And then a small percentage of them will actually go through to the podcast. And then I need to do that hundreds of times. So it's just, a marketing funnel. It's like awareness at the top, impressions, then your mid funnel, getting clicks, and then retaining those people is like also the hard part, I guess.
Yeah. We make similar clips, but I think the issue for me is I'm in the boat where you were, which is the following is so small that you're blasting it out to almost no one. And so you do rely on your guests helping you amplify that if they have bigger audiences.
No, and I think you do great writing, and I follow you, and I think I can see you're putting in so much effort and work. So I think the quality of your content is high. I think what happens, especially in the beginning, is you need like, and this is just my opinion, I'm definitely not an expert, but from my experience in speaking to others, there's like they're doing things that don't scale, but more specifically beyond like a phrase. It's like, that's like I DM, especially in the beginning, I DM like almost everyone who follows me. Now I don't do that as much because it's a little bit harder. I've replied to all the DMs. If you like, I only have 5,000 followers, and I get quite a lot of DMs now because of the podcast. Because on the podcast I say, hey, let me know on Twitter, and that helps. And it's just like in fact, there's other people who I DM'd cold because they mentioned like another podcast or something, and I like shared, hey, I saw you like this. I built on this conversation here. It's all the stuff I learned about SEO like 10 years ago. Like that's how you build links, like, so it's all of those things. And then another big thing I'll share is speaking to those people offline. Like it's not very scalable, but like jumping on a quick Zoom call, or like what we've been doing, jumping in a Clubhouse room, that you get some FaceTime or whatever with those people. And when you show up on their feed next time, they're going to be more likely to engage. So that's not the reason to do it, but like it helps in your overall goals too.